Hey folks, I'm happy. Out here in the wild, my best friends have fur and feathers, and we've learned that the most powerful things aren't built in city towers, but born from a good heart. Tonight's tale starts in a freezing Detroit snowstorm, with a broken supercar and a humble mechanic who fixed more than just an engine. He unearthed a stolen legacy to protect his little girl. It's a story about true grit, kindness, and finding the long road home. Where are you folks listening to this from? Drop a comment below, and hit that subscribe button for more tales around the campfire. The snow came down over the desolate stretch of Route 14 outside Detroit, like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The wind howled violently off the lakes, turning the black asphalt into a treacherous ribbon of ice and dropping the temperature to a brutal, biting low. It was the kind of night that swallowed headlights whole and made the world feel entirely empty. I'm Wilder. I run the front desk and manage the inventory down at Logan's shop, but mostly, I just watch the world turn from the garage bay doors. I'm pushing 60, with knees that ache when the barometer drops and a thinning patch of gray hair that I stopped caring about a decade ago. I've spent my whole life reading people the way some folks read diagnostic scanners, and I can tell you that the night it all started, the universe was pushing two very different worlds together on purpose. Sitting stranded on the shoulder of that unforgiving highway was Elena Vance. She was 32, the young chairwoman and CEO of Vance Motors, and she looked exactly like a woman carrying the weight of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Elena had sharp, striking features, piercing dark eyes that rarely softened, and a posture that remained rigid even in isolation. She wore a tailored charcoal cashmere coat that cost more than a decent used sedan. Ever since her father passed away abruptly, forcing her to take the helm of the company, she had built impenetrable walls around herself. She had to be ruthless and untouchable, which meant she rarely trusted anyone. Right now, however, she was trapped. Her aggressively sleek, unreleased luxury vehicle, a heavily engineered marvel of automotive tech, had simply died. The dashboard flashed a relentless crimson error state. But as the cold crept through the floorboards, Elena's mind wasn't entirely on the freezing temperature. She was agonizingly stressed about the upcoming launch. Staring at her fading tablet screen, she scrutinized the demand gen campaign they were building for YouTube. The video advertising assets were visually cinematic, but they lacked a soul. Her marketing team had spent weeks pitching headlines and optimizing site links designed to funnel traffic to their e-commerce landing pages, but the conversion projections were entirely unconvincing. The campaign was technically flawless, but emotionally bankrupt. They needed a core message, a heartbeat to drive the audience, and she was stranded out here in the snow without an answer. That was when Logan Hayes' headlights cut through the storm. Logan is the kind of man who doesn't need to announce his presence. He's in his early 40s, tall, with broad shoulders and hands that carry the permanent, ingrained shadows of motor oil and hard labor. He has quiet, steady eyes that hold a deep well of old grief, but also an unwavering patience. After his wife died in a tragic accident years ago, Logan retreated from the high-stakes world of automotive design. He traded corporate ambition for a small mechanic shop and the single most important thing left in his life, his daughter, Lily. Lily is 7 years old, a chaotic burst of pure warmth with unruly brown curls and a bright smile missing one front tooth. She is relentlessly optimistic, a stark contrast to the quiet sorrow her father sometimes carries. Waiting for Logan back at their small, warm house was Lily and Barnaby. Barnaby is a scruffy, three-legged terrier mix with a chewed-up left ear. Logan rescued him off the street 2 years ago. Barnaby is fiercely loyal to Lily, fiercely terrified of thunder, and represents Logan's quiet compulsion to save broken things. Logan was driving his battered, rust-spotted 98 Ford F-150, pushing through the storm to get home in time to kiss Lily goodnight. But when his headlights caught the reflective silver paint of the dead supercar, his foot found the brake pedal before his brain even processed the decision. He pulled over, the gravel crunching under the snow. He stepped out into the freezing squall, wearing nothing but a faded canvas work jacket, and walked up to the driver's side window. Elena rolled the glass down an inch, her expression defensive, sizing him up with the calculated suspicion of someone used to corporate espionage and opportunists. "Need a hand?" Logan asked, his voice calm and carrying over the howling wind. "I've already called for a private transport," Elena said smoothly, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed the cold. "I'm fine. Tow truck won't make it up. Route 14 inches this accumulation for at least 2 hours," Logan replied gently, not pushing, just stating a mechanical reality. I'm already out in the cold, and I've got a box of parts in the back. Might as well take a look. The tension in Elena's shoulders didn't completely vanish, but it shifted. She popped the hood. The wind whipped furiously as Logan retrieved a battered metal toolbox from his truck bed. He leaned over the complex, heavily shielded engine bay of a car that hadn't even been revealed to the public yet. Elena watched from the rearview mirror, expecting him to be baffled by the proprietary engineering. Instead, Logan moved with a hauntingly familiar rhythm. He didn't hesitate. He bypassed the stalled electronic control unit, identifying that the extreme thermal drop had caused a fail-safe lockdown in the main relay. Using a spare piece of copper wiring and a basic terminal connector from his box, he bridged the gap, tricking the sensor back into a closed loop. It took him exactly 18 minutes. He closed the hood with a solid thud and tapped the windshield. "Try it now." Elena pressed the ignition. The engine purred to life instantly, the heated seats immediately kicking on, wrapping her in a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief. She rolled the window down further, her corporate armor slipping just enough to show genuine gratitude. She reached into her designer bag, pulling out a thick money clip, ready to hand over whatever amount he wanted. Logan looked at the money, then looked at her, and slowly shook his head. "Keep it," Logan said, offering a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "On a snowy night like this, getting home safely is worth more than money." Elena froze. The hand holding the cash hovered in the freezing air. It was a sentence that didn't belong in her world. A world where everything had a price, a contract, or an underlying motive. She looked at this stranger, truly seeing him for the first time. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice quieter now, stripped of its usual authority. "Logan Hayes," he said. He gave a brief nod, turned his back to the biting wind, and walked back to his old Ford. Elena watched his taillights fade into the whiteout conditions. As she put the supercar into gear and drove toward her cold, empty penthouse and the ruthless boardroom waiting for her tomorrow, she couldn't shake the encounter. Meanwhile, Logan drove in the opposite direction, the heater in his truck rattling, his thoughts entirely consumed by the warm little house at the end of the road, where a three-legged dog was sleeping by the door and a little girl was waiting for her goodnight kiss. Chapter 2. The Memory Model and the Manipulator. The morning after the storm, the sunlight hitting Detroit felt thin and unapologetic, reflecting off the ice-slick streets like broken glass. Inside the glass and steel fortress of Vance Motors headquarters, the atmosphere was a completely different kind of cold. Up on the 50th floor, Richard Thorne, the vice president of strategy, was already dismantling people before their morning coffee. Richard was a man who looked like he had been born in a boardroom and had never stepped foot on actual dirt. He was in his mid-50s, with silver hair slicked back into an immaculate, impenetrable helmet, wearing an aggressive, custom-tailored navy pinstripe suit that projected sheer dominance. He had the cold, calculating eyes of a predatory bird and a personality devoid of empathy. Richard didn't converse, he commanded, having built his entire career on hostile takeovers and burying anyone who dared to read the fine print. He paced the executive conference room, barking at the exhausted marketing team. He was ruthlessly driving the launch of their highly anticipated $40 million supercar prototype. "I don't want to hear about engineering delays or back-end glitches," Richard snapped, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Optimize the e-commerce landing pages by noon. We are pushing the campaign assets across all platforms today. Scrub any internal memos regarding the prototype's origin delays. The narrative is forward-looking, aggressive, and flawless. Do you understand? I want no risks, no questions, and absolutely no loose ends." He was systematically burying the messy reality of the car's development, demanding a sterile, bulletproof public image to protect his own massive stake in the upcoming reveal. 2 floors down, in a much quieter but equally tense office, Elena Vance was ignoring the launch metrics. Instead, she was staring at a brief compiled by her executive assistant, Maya. Maya was 26, constantly vibrating with a mix of caffeine and anxiety, hiding her perpetual stress behind thick wire-rimmed frames and a flawlessly organized iPad. Maya was the only person in the building who wasn't terrified of Elena, mostly because she was too busy managing her schedule. "His name is Logan Hayes," Maya said, tapping the screen to bring up a modest profile. "He's a single father, widowed. He runs a small, independent auto repair shop on the outskirts of the city. No major corporate ties, No advanced degrees on record. Just a local mechanic. Elena leaned back in her leather chair, her brow furrowed in deep disbelief. Her entire floor of Ivy League-educated engineers had spent 72 hours trying to decode the prototype's lockdown sequence, and they had failed. Yet, a local mechanic with a rusty toolbox had bypassed the proprietary thermal failsafe in 18 minutes on the side of a freezing highway. Driven by a mix of intense curiosity and a desperate need to understand her own product before Richard took total control of the narrative, Elena made a decision that defied corporate protocol. She ordered the prototype loaded onto an unmarked flatbed. Down at Callaway Auto, which was what the faded sign above Logan's garage still read, the morning was smelling like stale coffee and degreaser. I was sitting on my usual stool near the register, sorting through a stack of late invoices, while Logan was methodically rebuilding a carburetor, when the unmarked flatbed hauler pulled into our gravel lot, followed by a sleek black SUV. The heavy thrum of the diesel engine rattled our front windows. Logan wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag and walked out into the biting morning air. Elena stepped out of the SUV, trading her cashmere coat from the night before for a sharp, practical blazer. She greeted Logan, explaining that since he had managed to resurrect the car in a blizzard, she wanted to hire him for a full diagnostic before the vehicle's public launch. Logan listened politely, but when the transport driver pulled the heavy canvas cover off the vehicle, Logan stopped breathing. I've known Logan for a long time, and I have only seen him look like that once at a funeral in the dead of winter. As the sunlight hit the aggressive, sweeping lines of the supercar, the custom aerodynamic intakes, and the unique curvature of the rear chassis, Logan didn't see a $40 million corporate asset. He saw a ghost. His mind violently pulled him backward in time. He saw Evelyn. Evelyn had been a force of nature, a brilliant, fiery engineer with a loud, infectious laugh. Her hair always tied in a messy bun secured by a pencil, her fingers perpetually stained with graphite. He remembered her sitting at their kitchen table late at night, the blueprints spread out like a treasure map, her eyes shining as she mapped out the impossible aerodynamics of a car they dreamed of building together. They had named the design after her, and then the memory shifted, plunging him into the crushing darkness of the icy ravine where her car had been found. He had spent years convincing himself that the crash that took his wife was a cruel, random tragedy of the winter roads, a twist of fate that destroyed his world and left him alone with Lily. But looking at this car, her car, materialized in metal and carbon fiber, a sickening realization began to claw at his chest. Before Logan could speak, the crunch of expensive leather shoes on gravel broke the silence. A second Blacktown car had pulled into the lot, and Richard Thorne stepped out, buttoning his suit jacket with a look of profound disgust as he surveyed the modest garage. Richard had tracked the prototype's GPS, furious that Elena had taken their prized asset off-site. "Elena, this is absurd," Richard sneered, walking up to the group without acknowledging Logan. "We have an investor launch in less than a week, and you bring our flagship prototype to a dirt lot garage? What exactly is this lowly mechanic going to tell us that a team of PhDs cannot?" At the sound of that voice, Logan's head snapped up. The blood in his veins ran to ice. The years had added silver to the man's hair and sharper lines to his face, but the arrogant, hollow pitch of his voice was unmistakable. It was the sponsor, the wealthy venture capitalist who, years ago, had funded Logan and Evelyn's early research, the same man who had aggressively cornered them, demanding they surrender the total rights to the Evelyn design to his holding company, laughing at their refusal. Logan stood frozen, his grease-stained hands balling into tight fists at his sides. The man who had mocked his wife's ambition, the man who wanted to steal her legacy, was standing in his driveway claiming ownership of her dream. And suddenly, the tragic accident that had left his daughter without a mother didn't seem like an accident at all. Chapter 3: Awakening the Core and the Final Words. Logan swallowed the rising bile in his throat, forcing his fists to uncoil as he stared at Richard Thorne's smug, impeccably tailored presence in the center of his humble garage. "I'll fix the system," Logan said, his voice dangerously quiet. His eyes were locked not on Richard, but on Elena, communicating a silent storm of unresolved grief and sudden, razor-sharp focus. Richard scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed off the cinder-block walls. "You're wasting company time, Elena," Thorne spat, adjusting his silk tie with absolute arrogance. "If this backwoods grease monkey damages a $40 million asset, the board will have your head. I have a launch to finalize, and I won't let this charade delay it." With a dramatic pivot, Thorne marched back to his town car, the heavy door slamming shut like a vault. Once the vehicle crunched out of the gravel lot, the heavy silence of the garage returned, save for the low, rhythmic hum of Logan's space heater. Elena let out a tense breath, her rigid corporate facade cracking just a fraction as she rubbed her temples. "Can you actually fix it?" she asked softly, the commanding tone of the CEO completely absent. Logan didn't answer immediately. He walked over to his battered metal workbench and pulled out a heavily modified, outdated diagnostic laptop, a relic from his days as a lead powertrain engineer. "I know exactly what's wrong with it," he murmured, plugging a thick braided cable into a hidden diagnostic port beneath the supercar's sleek dashboard, a port that wasn't listed on any of Vance Motors' official schematics. He wasn't just fixing a car, he was hunting for ghosts. Logan knew that underneath the polished, heavily encrypted Vance Motors interface, the original architecture he and Evelyn had built was still breathing. He began typing, his grease-stained fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and precision that defied his rugged appearance. He was looking for a very specific line of code, a backdoor malware sequence they had programmed into the prototype years ago. It was a digital signature, a fail-safe vault designed to protect their intellectual property from predatory investors. While Logan navigated the labyrinth of code, Elena stepped out into the biting cold of the gravel lot, pulling her blazer tight against the wind to make a secure, encrypted phone call. She dialed Maya, her trusted executive assistant. Back at the towering glass headquarters of Vance Motors, Maya was already barricaded inside her office. Her wire-rimmed glasses were sliding down her nose as her fingers danced frantically across her dual monitors. "Maya, I need you to dig into the old acquisition files," Elena ordered, her breath pluming in the freezing air, her eyes darting back to the garage where Logan was working. Everything related to the prototype's origin, the shell holding companies, and Richard Thorne's private acquisitions from 7 years ago. "Follow the money and do it quietly." Maya swallowed hard, the sound audible over the line. "I'm already on it, Miss Vance, but there's a serious problem." Enter Silas Croft. Silas was Thorne's personal digital cleaner and the head of internal cybersecurity for Vance Motors. He was a pale, skeletal man in his mid-30s, with a shaved head, sharp, rat-like features, and a perpetually smug expression. Silas was a man who lived on black coffee and corporate espionage, operating in the shadows of the server room with ruthless efficiency. "Someone is actively scrubbing the archives as we speak," Maya whispered frantically into the receiver, watching classified files disappear from the directory in real time. "It's Croft. He's using a localized wipe protocol. Every time I trace a shell company linked to Thorne, the ledger just vanishes into thin air." A tense, high-stakes game of digital cat and mouse erupted within the Vance Motors network. Maya rapidly mirrored the remaining encrypted drives, sweating under the fluorescent lights as she desperately tried to snatch the financial breadcrumbs before Silas could burn them to digital ash. She used Elena's executive override credentials to bypass Croft's firewalls, fighting a terrifying war of keystrokes to preserve the evidence of Thorne's theft. Back inside the garage, the air grew incredibly heavy. Logan had successfully bypassed the primary Vance operating system, delving into the deep architectural root of the car's firmware. A stark black prompt appeared on his cracked laptop screen, demanding a bypass cipher. Logan's breath hitched in his chest. He typed in a sequence. Only he and his wife knew the exact GPS coordinates of the snowy hill where they had their first date, followed by her initials. Enter. The $40 million supercar suddenly shuddered. The aggressive crimson warning lights on the dashboard shifted to a soft, pulsing blue. The massive central infotainment screen flickered, the corporate Vance logo dissolving into a burst of chaotic static. Elena walked back into the bay just as the static cleared, putting her phone away. What appeared on the screen wasn't a diagnostic readout or a system reboot. It was a hidden video file. Logan's knees nearly buckled, his hand gripping the steering wheel for support. It was Evelyn. She looked exhausted, her trademark messy brown bun unraveling, her fingers stained with the familiar dark smudges of graphite. But her bright eyes were wide, with a frantic, terrifying clarity. She was sitting in the dimly lit cabin of this exact car, holding a handheld camera. "If you are seeing this, Logan, it means I didn't make it home." Her recorded voice echoed through the high-end speakers, sounding so painfully real, so impossibly close, that Logan let out a choked sob. Elena froze, her eyes widening as she stared at the screen. "Richard Thorne knows we won't sell. Evelyn's digital ghost continued, her voice trembling but resolute. He cornered me tonight at the lab. He told me that if he couldn't own the patent, he would ensure the design never saw the light of day. I found a GPS tracker on the chassis, Logan. My brakes. The telemetry shows someone tampered with the hydraulic lines. He's trying to stage an accident. He's going to kill me to take Evelyn. A single tear slipped down the recorded Evelyn's cheek as she looked directly into the lens, transcending time and death. I locked the core data. Only you can open it. Expose him, Logan. Protect Lily. I love you both so much. The video abruptly faded to black, leaving only the sound of Logan's ragged, shattered breathing in the cold garage. The agonizing truth crashed down on him with the devastating force of a physical blow. The crash all those years ago wasn't the ice. It wasn't a tragic twist of fate. It was cold-blooded murder. Elena stood paralyzed in the shadows, the blood draining from her sharp features as the horrifying reality settled into her bones. The flagship empire she was trying to protect was built entirely on stolen dreams and innocent blood. Chapter 4. The Pressure in the Dark. The digital ping that alerted Silas Croft to the breach of the prototype's core system was faint, but in the paranoid, hyper-surveilled ecosystem of Richard Thorne's empire, it was as loud as a gunshot. By the time dawn broke over the freezing Detroit skyline, Richard knew that Logan Hayes had not only bypassed the thermal failsafe, but had unlocked the ghost of Evelyn Hayes. The secret Richard had buried under the ice 7 years ago was now breathing again. He did not panic. Men like Richard Thorne did not panic. They simply crushed whatever stood in their way. Inside the sleek, mahogany-paneled boardroom on the top floor of Vance Motors, the air was suffocatingly tense. Richard had called an emergency meeting of the board of directors, a calculated ambush designed to corner Elena before she could weaponize the truth. Sitting at the head of the table was Arthur Sterling, the board's majority shareholder. Arthur was a man in his late 70s, possessing the dry, withered look of someone who had traded his soul for compound interest decades ago. He wore impeccably tailored tweed suits, leaned heavily on a silver-tipped cane, and possessed a pragmatism so ruthless it bordered on cruelty. Arthur cared absolutely nothing for corporate ethics or human collateral. His only god was the quarterly profit margin. Richard paced the length of the room, painting Elena as a liability. Our chairwoman's recent behavior is erratic and poses a catastrophic risk to our stock valuation, Richard declared, his voice smooth and laced with manufactured concern. Taking our $40 million flagship prototype to a dirt lot garage on the eve of our most critical launch? Allowing an unvetted, uneducated mechanic to interface with our proprietary systems? It is a dereliction of duty. He turned his predatory gaze toward Elena, who sat rigidly at the opposite end of the table. I am proposing a motion. Elena either steps back and allows me to orchestrate the launch event tonight without any further interference, or the board initiates an immediate vote of no confidence to strip her of her title. Elena looked at Arthur, whose cold eyes offered no support. He simply tapped his cane, signaling his agreement with Richard. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to scream, to throw Evelyn's video onto the massive projector and watch Richard be dragged out in handcuffs. But Maya had warned her just an hour ago. Silas Croft had heavily encrypted the internal servers, and they still needed a few more hours to extract the undeniable financial paper trail, proving Richard had ordered the hit on Evelyn. Without the financial link, Richard's high-priced lawyers would dismiss the video as a deepfake created by a disgruntled, grieving mechanic. She needed time. Swallowing her pride and masking her disgust, Elena forced her face into a portrait of absolute compliance. There is no need for a vote, she said, her voice perfectly steady, devoid of the raging fire in her chest. The launch will proceed exactly as planned, Richard. You have the floor. Richard smirked, a chilling stretch of his lips. He believed he had won, assuming the young chairwoman had finally broken under his boot. Miles away, the pressure was taking a much more visceral form. Logan was wiping down a wrench in his garage when a massive, jet-black SUV rolled onto the gravel. It wasn't Elena this time. A man stepped out, moving with a terrifying, predatory grace. This was Marcus Kell, Richard Thorne's physical fixer. Marcus was built like a cinderblock wall, standing 6'4", with a thick, heavily scarred neck and a flattened nose that spoke of a violent past in underground rings. He wore a cheap leather jacket, stretched tightly across his broad shoulders, and spoke in a voice so soft it forced you to lean in, making his threats feel intimately terrifying. Marcus walked into the garage, ignoring Logan entirely at first. Instead, His cold, dead eyes scanned the space until they landed on a small, brightly colored drawing pinned to the corkboard, a crayon picture of a three-legged dog. Below it, Lily's pink backpack was resting on a stool. Barnaby, the scruffy terrier mix, immediately sensed the malice. He placed himself between the backpack and Marcus, baring his teeth and emitting a low, guttural growl that shook his small frame. "Cute dog," Marcus murmured, picking up the pink backpack with one massive, calloused hand. He inspected the name tag. Lily, 2nd grade at Oak Creek Elementary. School lets out at 3:15, doesn't it? Logan's blood turned to ice, and then instantly boiled into blinding rage. He grabbed a heavy steel crowbar from the workbench, his knuckles turning white, the veins in his forearms bulging. "Put the bag down and get out of my shop," Logan growled, every muscle in his body coiled to strike. Marcus smiled, a hollow, terrifying expression, and gently placed the backpack back on the stool. "Mr. Thorne is a very private man, Logan. He doesn't like old ghosts being dug up, and he certainly doesn't want anyone causing a scene at his car launch tonight." Marcus took a slow step toward Logan, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "Snowy roads in Detroit are incredibly dangerous. It would be a damn shame if another tragic accident happened to your family. Keep your mouth shut, mechanic. Burn whatever you found. Go pick up your daughter and stay home." Marcus turned and walked out, the SUV tires kicking up gravel as he disappeared down the icy road. The heavy steel crowbar slipped from Logan's trembling hand, clattering loudly against the concrete floor. He collapsed onto the stool, burying his face in his grease-stained hands. The agonizing weight of the ultimatum crushed the air from his lungs. For 7 years, he had lived with a hole in his heart, mourning Evelyn. Now, knowing she was murdered, every instinct screamed at him to tear Richard Thorne apart. But the image of Lily's bright smile flashed in his mind. He was a father first. If fighting for Evelyn meant putting his little girl in the crosshairs of a ruthless killer, he didn't know if he could pay that price. He sat in the cold garage, paralyzed by the horrific choice between securing justice for the dead or protecting the living. His burner phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a secure text from Elena. "I had to surrender to him in the boardroom to buy us time. Maya is breaking through the final firewall. Please, Logan, don't let him bury her again. Meet me at the venue tonight." Logan stared at the glowing screen, the shadows of the garage lengthening around him, standing at the precipice of the hardest decision of his life. Chapter 5. The Fateful Podium. The Grand River Atrium in downtown Detroit had been transformed into a cathedral of modern engineering and corporate opulence. Blinding spotlights swept across the vaulted glass ceiling, cutting through the manufactured fog that blanketed the main stage. Hundreds of elite investors, automotive journalists, and industry titans mingled over crystal flutes of champagne, completely unaware of the invisible war raging just beneath the surface of the gala. At the center of it all, hidden beneath a shimmering silver silk tarp, sat the $40 million prototype. Richard Thorne was entirely in his element. He stood near the edge of the stage, his custom navy pinstripe suit immaculate, his silver hair catching the flashing bulbs of the press cameras. He wore the smug, untouchable smile of a man who had successfully buried all his sins. In his mind, tonight was his ultimate coronation. Standing in the absolute back of the crowded hall, swallowed by the shadows near the exit doors, was Logan Hayes. He had scrubbed the motor oil from his hands until they were raw, and wore a simple, slightly faded black suit that felt suffocating against his broad shoulders. His jaw was locked tight, his knuckles white as he stared at the man who had murdered his wife. Standing right beside Logan was Wilder, the grizzled, 60-year-old garage manager from Callaway Auto. Wilder looked entirely out of place in his worn corduroy jacket, but his presence was vital. Perched safely on Wilder's sturdy arm was Lily. Despite Marcus Kell's terrifying threats earlier that afternoon, Logan had refused to leave his daughter out of his sight, trusting no one but Wilder, a man with a fiercely protective streak, and a concealed carry permit to keep her safe. Lily wore a bright yellow dress, her small hands clutching Wilder's collar, her innocent eyes wide at the spectacle, completely unaware of the danger or the gravity of the night. The house lights dimmed, signaling the start of the presentation. A hushed anticipation rippled through the atrium. Richard Thorne strode confidently up to the sleek acrylic podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome." Richard's booming, authoritative voice echoed through the massive hall. "Tonight, we are not just revealing a car. We are revealing the future of Vance Motors, a future built on a singular vision. For years, I have personally overseen the architecture, the engineering, and the soul of this machine. I poured my own genius into this design, ensuring that it stands as a testament to what unwavering corporate ambition can achieve. Down in the crowd, Logan seethed, his chest tightening, as Richard shamelessly laid claim to Evelyn's brilliance. High above the auditorium floor, inside the glass-enclosed technical control booth, Silas Croft sat before a massive bank of glowing monitors. The pale, skeletal head of cybersecurity was hovering his finger over the master cue, ready to launch the aggressively edited, high-octane promotional video Richard had demanded. But Silas didn't notice the silent, phantom intrusion bleeding into his network. 3 floors down, locked securely inside a server closet, Maya was executing her final strike. She had spent the last agonizing hours breaking through the final firewall, compiling the financial ledgers that proved Richard's payments to the shell companies and the hitmen. Having secured the data, she unleashed a localized worm directly into the auditorium's AV control system. Back on stage, Richard gestured grandly toward the curtain. "I invite our chairwoman, Elena Vance, to join me as we unveil my masterpiece." Elena walked out from the wings. She did not look like a defeated executive. She wore a striking, stark white suit that made her look like a blade cutting through the dark stage. Her posture was uncompromising, her dark eyes entirely devoid of fear. She stepped past Richard, ignoring his outstretched hand, and took the podium. She looked out at the sea of flashes, her gaze briefly locking with Logan's in the back of the room. "Richard Thorne has told you a story of vision," Elena said, her voice ringing out with a cold, terrifying clarity that instantly unsettled the room. "But Vance Motors cannot build its future on a foundation of stolen legacy and blood. The car beneath that tarp does not belong to Richard Thorne, and the promotional video you are about to see is a lie." Richard's smug expression shattered. He lunged toward the podium, hissing, "Elena, what the hell are you doing? Cut her mic!" Up in the control booth, Silas Croft scrambled. He slammed his palm against the audio kill switch, but the digital console flashed a harsh, blinding red. "Access denied." Panicking, Silas tried to force a hard reboot to kill the massive LED screen behind the stage, frantically typing override commands. But Maya's virus had completely locked the mainframe. The power grid was frozen. Silas was completely paralyzed inside his own system. On stage, Elena pressed a single button on her remote. The massive LED screen behind them didn't play a high-octane marketing reel. Instead, it went pitch black. Then, a raw, unedited video file sputtered to life. The deafening chatter of the gala died instantly. Total, absolute silence fell over the thousands of people in the room. Evelyn's face appeared on the 50-foot screen. Her frantic, tear-streaked eyes looked down at the crowd. "If you are seeing this, Logan, it means I didn't make it home." Her voice boomed through the concert-grade speakers, dripping with raw, visceral terror. "Richard Thorne knows we won't sell. He's trying to stage an accident. He's going to kill me to take Evelyn." The atmosphere in the atrium turned to ice. Investors dropped their champagne glasses. They shattered against the marble floor, the only sound accompanying Evelyn's damning testimony. Richard stood frozen in the spotlight, his face entirely drained of color, his empire crumbling in real time under the weight of a ghost's accusation. "The true architect of this vehicle was Evelyn Hayes," Elena declared, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She pointed toward the back of the room. "And I invite the co-creator, her husband, Logan Hayes, to step into the light." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Logan walked slowly down the center aisle. The heavy burden of 7 years of suffocating grief and powerlessness falling away with every step. He didn't look at the flashing cameras or the murmuring billionaires. He looked only at the stage, at the vindication of his wife's memory. When he reached the podium, Logan stood tall, the undeniable truth radiating from him. Before Richard could even attempt to run, the heavy doors of the atrium burst open. A squad of uniformed police officers stormed the venue, moving with absolute tactical precision. Leading them was Detective Sarah Higgins, a tall, imposing woman with sharp, no-nonsense features and a heavy trench coat that had seen countless crime scenes. She had spent her career putting away violent men, and she possessed a zero-tolerance policy for white-collar criminals who thought money could buy them out of murder. Based on the undeniable digital and financial evidence Maya had delivered to her precinct an hour ago, Higgins marched directly onto the stage. "Richard Thorne," Detective Higgins barked, grabbing the executive by the shoulder and violently spinning him around. "You are under arrest for the murder of Evelyn Hayes, corporate fraud, and conspiracy." The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoing across the microphone was the loudest sound in the world. Richard, stripped of his power and his arrogance, was dragged off the stage in front of the entire automotive world. As the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the glass atrium from the outside, Logan turned away from the podium. He looked across the vast room over the sea of stunned faces until his eyes found the back wall. Wilder gave a firm, solemn nod, and resting on Wilder's shoulder, Lily was looking right at her father. She offered a small, bright, toothless smile. As their eyes met, Logan let out a long, trembling breath. The nightmare was finally over. The suffocating dark had broken, and for the first time in 7 years, Logan Hayes felt the warmth of the light. Chapter 6. The Fateful Encounter Under the Light. The dust from Richard Thorne's highly publicized arrest settled into a quiet, transformative era for Vance Motors, fundamentally altering the DNA of the sprawling automotive empire. A month after the chaotic gala, Elena sat in her sunlit executive office, sliding a thick, meticulously drafted stack of legal documents across her mahogany desk. Logan sat opposite her, wearing a simple, comfortable flannel shirt, looking entirely unbothered by the sheer immense wealth represented by the papers resting near his calloused hands. Elena had kept her absolute promise. The board of directors, thoroughly purged of Thorne's loyalists and deeply terrified of the ensuing PR nightmare, had officially transferred every single patent, blueprint, and intellectual property right of the prototype back to Logan Hayes. He was now, on paper, the sole owner of a multi-billion-dollar automotive design. Almost immediately, the industry sharks had begun to circle the waters. Just yesterday, Victor Sterling, Arthur Sterling's notoriously greedy nephew, and the CEO of a rival European auto conglomerate, had ambushed Logan outside his modest garage. Victor was a man in his early 30s who wore bespoke Italian suits that cost more than Logan's truck, reeking of expensive cologne and unearned privilege. He possessed a sharp, weasel-like face and a deeply unsettling habit of smiling without his eyes, treating every human interaction as a hostile negotiation. Victor had practically shoved a blank check into Logan's chest, offering an obscene, life-altering amount of money to buy the Evelyn design outright, hoping to capitalize on the media frenzy and bury the Vance Motors legacy for good. Logan had looked at the blank check, then looked down at Victor's polished leather shoes, standing on his grease-stained gravel, and calmly handed the paper back, telling the young CEO that some things in this world were simply not for sale. Now, sitting in the quiet sanctuary of Elena's office, Logan picked up the patent transfer documents and deliberately pushed them back across the desk toward her. Elena's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Logan leaned forward, his steady eyes meeting hers, and explained that Evelyn had never wanted her car to sit gathering dust in a private museum, nor did she ever want it chopped up and sold in pieces to the highest corporate bidder. She had built it to be driven, to protect people, and to push the boundaries of what a machine could do. He wanted to gift the design rights back to Vance Motors, specifically placing them under Elena's sole protection on one non-negotiable condition. Logan would formally join the company as a senior engineering advisor to oversee the final production lines, ensuring the vehicle was built exactly as his wife had originally intended, without any compromised safety protocols or invasive data tracking. Elena, deeply moved by the monumental gesture of trust and forgiveness, accepted without a second of hesitation. Over the next year, Vance Motors underwent a radical philosophical shift that rippled through every single department. The company's marketing division entirely scrapped Richard Thorne's old, aggressively sterile playbooks. Elena personally spearheaded a massive restructuring of their public image, leaning heavily into a new demand gen video advertising campaign specifically tailored for YouTube and global streaming platforms. But instead of bombarding viewers with hollow metrics, aggressive horsepower statistics, and frantic site links pushing them toward e-commerce landing pages, the narrative paradigm was entirely different. The core message of the multi-million-dollar campaign was simply titled The Journey Home. The highly cinematic YouTube video ads focused entirely on the quiet, profound, and universally understood moments of human life. A father driving cautiously through a blinding blizzard to reach his daughter, the overwhelming warmth of a safe arrival after a long journey, and the inherent, immeasurable value of human kindness on a dark road. It wasn't just about selling a luxury vehicle anymore. The campaign was a heartfelt dedication to honoring safety, familial bonds, and the everyday people you trust with your life. The marketing shift resonated globally, generating unprecedented audience engagement because it possessed something incredibly rare in the ruthless corporate automotive world: a genuine beating soul. Exactly 12 months after that freezing, fateful night on Route 14, Vance Motors held an exclusive, intimate exhibition in a converted, sunlit gallery space in the heart of downtown Detroit to officially launch the finished vehicle. There were no flashing strobe lights, no deafening club music, and no manufactured fog, just honest, natural afternoon light pouring through the massive skylights, illuminating the polished concrete floor. At the exact center of the room sat the finalized, production-ready Evelyn. It was a breathtaking marvel of modern engineering, aggressively sleek and impossibly powerful, yet carrying an undeniable, sweeping elegance that felt almost protective in its stance. Right beside the dazzling supercar, resting on a simple rubber display mat in a juxtaposition that required absolutely no printed explanation for those who knew the true story, sat Elena's personal Vance luxury sedan. It was the exact same car that had broken down in the freezing snowstorm a year ago, still bearing the tiny, makeshift copper wire bypass Logan had installed with freezing fingers in the dead of the night. Logan stood quietly near the edge of the exhibit, dressed in a comfortable, tailored blazer that fit him perfectly, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. A soft, completely unburdened smile graced his face as he watched Lily. The 8-year-old girl was happily running around the gallery floor in a bright floral dress, completely captivated by the shiny reflections on the cars, her joyful, echoing laughter filling the high ceilings of the room. The heavy, suffocating sorrow that had clouded Logan's eyes for 7 long years was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, enduring peace that settled into his very bones. Elena walked over, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. She wore a simple, elegant dark dress, her hair falling naturally around her shoulders, completely stripped of the rigid corporate armor she had worn for so long. She handed him a glass, and they stood side by side in a comfortable, companionable silence, watching Lily gently trace the silver-plated lettering of her mother's name on the supercar's rear fender. Elena turned to Logan, not looking at him as a business partner, an advisor, or a mechanic, but as a true soulmate and confidant. They had weathered the darkest, most violent corporate storm imaginable, and had come out the other side fundamentally changed, forged into family by fire and snow. "It's beautiful, Logan," Elena said softly, her dark eyes reflecting the bright, warm gallery lights. "She would be so incredibly proud of what you've done." Logan took a slow sip of his coffee, looking deeply at the magnificent car, then at his smiling daughter, and finally at the woman standing beside him, who had risked her entire empire to help him find the truth. "Yeah," Logan replied, his voice thick with quiet gratitude and closure. "She really would be. And you know, I think we finally made it home." The greatest lesson this story leaves us with is that true wealth is never measured by bank accounts or high corporate titles. It is measured by the quiet acts of kindness we offer to strangers in the dark. In our daily lives, we might not be fixing luxury cars in a blizzard, but we all have moments where we can choose to be a light for someone else. It could be a warm smile for a tired stranger, a patient ear for a friend, or simply doing the right thing when no one is watching. Honesty and love will always guide us through our hardest storms and lead us back home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and family. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below so we can keep bringing you more meaningful journeys. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, health, and a heart full of endless compassion. If you believe that a simple act of kindness can change the world, please type Amen in the comments.